The grandfather clock in our hallway struck 3 times, its deep resonance echoing through our silent house. I hadn't meant to be awake at this hour, but a persistent thirst had pulled me from sleep, guiding me down the stairs toward our kitchen. As I reached for a glass from the cabinet, my husband's voice drifted from his steady, soft, intimate, and definitely not meant for my ears. "I'm Olivia Winters, and until that moment, I believed I had built the perfect life with Marcus. 15. Years of marriage had given us a beautiful colonial home in the suburbs, respectable careers, and the kind of stability that made our friends openly envious. Marcus had worked his way up to become the financial controller at Waverly Investments, while I had established myself as a successful event planner, creating picture-perfect celebrations for other people's milestones. That night, barefoot in my own hallway, I became an unwilling audience to the destruction of that perfect life. "Josephine, I miss you already," Marcus whispered, his voice carrying that tender quality I hadn't heard directed at me in months. "Yesterday was incredible. The way you looked at me across that conference table. I nearly lost my mind trying to stay professional. My fingers froze around the glass. Josephine, his new junior financial analyst. The brilliant hire he couldn't stop praising at dinner. The woman whose fresh perspective had apparently justified all those late nights at the office over the past 3 months. No, she doesn't suspect anything," he continued, oblivious to my presence just beyond the door. Olivia's too wrapped up in her clients' weddings to notice what's happening in her own marriage. The casual cruelty of his assessment struck harder than the revelation of the affair itself. I stood motionless, my breathing shallow, as if making a sound might break whatever spell was allowing me to hear this brutal truth. "This weekend? I don't know. She's planning some dinner thing with the Hendersons. But I could say there's an emergency with the Pacifica account." He paused, listening. "You're right. That worked last time." Last time, the words echoed in my mind as memories reshaped themselves. The emergency client meeting 3 weeks ago. The Saturday training seminar. The industry conference that had supposedly run late, sending him home exhausted and distant. I should have confronted him then. A part of me wanted to throw open the door, to demand explanations and apologies. But something colder and more calculating held me back. The woman who had arranged hundreds of perfect events recognized an opportunity when she saw one. I know, Marcus continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Eventually, I'll figure out how to tell her. But you know how complicated these things are. The house, our finances. It's all intertwined. The practical discussion of logistics of me as a problem to be solved solidified something in my chest. This wasn't just passion or a midlife crisis. This was premeditated betrayal, complete with risk assessments and exit strategies. I retreated silently to our bedroom, thirst forgotten. While Marcus continued his whispered promises downstairs, I opened my laptop and created a new folder labeled Catering Options. No one ever questioned a woman's interest in party planning details. By morning, I had compiled a list of our accounts, investments, and assets. I de-photographed his phone while he showered, capturing texts that confirmed what I'd heard. I'd reviewed our calendar for patterns, noting each late meeting that coincided with Josephine joining his team. When Marcus kissed me goodbye, mentioning casually that the Pacifica account might require weekend attention, I smiled and packed him an extra protein bar for his long day. "Don't worry about dinner," I told him. "I understand how important this account is." As his car disappeared down our tree-lined street, I picked up my phone and called my oldest friend Vanessa, who happened to be a divorce attorney. "We need to talk," I said simply, "and I need you to teach me everything about protecting myself." The perfect wife was about to become the perfect strategist, and Marcus would never see it coming. The sleek manila folder labeled Henderson Anniversary sat innocently in my desk drawer. nestled between actual client files. Inside, however, was the meticulously documented collapse of my marriage. For 3 weeks, I had become a forensic investigator of my own life, excavating the ruins of trust with surgical precision. "This is impressive, Olivia," Vanessa said, leafing through my collection during our private lunch at a cafe 20 miles from my neighborhood. Credit card statements, hotel receipts, screenshots of text messages. You've built a solid case. 15 years of organizing events taught me something about documentation, I replied, stirring my untouched tea. And apparently my husband isn't as clever as he thinks. Marcus had grown comfortable in his deception, making mistakes that would have been obvious if I'd been looking. The Pacifica account he frequently cited as needing emergency attention. I'd called Waverly Investments posing as a potential client and discovered it had been successfully closed months ago. The business dinners charged to his corporate card frequently included 2 specialty cocktails, one his favorite old-fashioned, the other a lavender gin fizz that I'd never order but had heard Josephine request at the company holiday party. "What? About the joint accounts?" Vanessa asked, her legal mind working through practicalities. "I've moved 40% to my private account," I explained. "Not enough to trigger suspicion, but enough to ensure I'm not left vulnerable." What I didn't tell Vanessa was that my investigation extended beyond financial preparation. I'd discovered that Josephine wasn't just Marcus's subordinate. She was Theodore Henderson's niece, the daughter of his wife Patricia's brother. Theodore, as managing partner at Waverly, had fast-tracked Josephine's hiring as a favor to family. Unaware that his protégé Marcus would initiate an affair with his relative. Each night, I maintained the charade of our marriage. I prepared Marcus's favorite meals, listened to his stories about work challenges, and pretended not to notice when he took calls in the garage. The woman he spoke to on those calls, who made him laugh in ways I no longer could, was becoming increasingly entangled in our social circle. "Darling," Marcus mentioned casually over breakfast, "Theodore suggested we include Josephine and her husband Daniel in our next dinner gathering. Apparently, Daniel's a gifted architect who might have insights for your client's venue renovation." I smiled, adding Josephine's name to our guest list with steady hands. What a wonderful idea. I've been hoping to get to know her better. The careful architecture of my response satisfied him. He didn't notice that I'd already researched Daniel. Whitmore, a rising star at a prestigious firm, devoted to a wife who was systematically betraying him. Social media showed them as the perfect couple. Hiking trips, charity galas, and anniversary posts proclaiming undying love. I wondered if his suspicions had begun forming yet, or if he remained as blissfully ignorant as I had been in the evenings. While Marcus worked late, a euphemism I now understood, I transformed our home into a fortress of evidence. I installed a small recording device in Marcus's study after confirming with Vanessa that Pennsylvania's 2-party consent laws had exceptions for gathering evidence of infidelity within one's own home. I created backup copies of everything, storing them in Vanessa's office safe. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Vanessa asked during one of our strategy sessions. There are less confrontational ways to handle divorce. This stopped being about divorce the moment I heard him laughing at my obliviousness. I replied, "This is about consequences." The final piece fell into place when Theodore mentioned their company retreat at the lakeside resort the same weekend. Marcus had told me he needed to attend a financial seminar in Pittsburgh. I accessed our shared cloud storage and found photos automatically uploaded from his phone Marcus and Josephine, reflected in a hotel mirror, his hand possessively at her waist. That night, I sent invitations for our dinner party, scheduled for the following Saturday. The guest list included Theodore and Patricia Henderson, Daniel and Josephine Whitmore, and several key colleagues from Waverly Investments. Marcus reviewed the list with casual approval, suggesting we use the good china. "It's worth the effort." he said, kissing my cheek. Some important connections will be at this table. I nodded, thinking of the folder in my desk, the recordings on my private server, and the precisely arranged seating chart. You have no idea how important this dinner will be, I agreed, returning to my planning with renewed purpose. Saturday arrived with the kind of crystalline autumn perfection that event planners dream about. Sunlight spilled through freshly cleaned windows, highlighting the careful arrangements I'd made throughout our home. Crystal glasses stood in military precision on the dining table, flanking the heirloom china that had belonged to Marcus's grandmother, a deliberate choice for tonight's theater dot at 4:30 p.m. I surveyed my work with clinical detachment. The table settings were immaculate, name cards positioned with strategic intent. Theodore and Patricia Henderson would sit at the head with Marcus, while Josephine and Daniel Whitmore would be placed directly across from each other rather than side by side, a small psychological advantage in what was to come. Our other guests, Richard from Legal, Eliza from Human Resources, and Graham, a board member at Waverly, completed my carefully orchestrated audience. Everything looks stunning, Marcus commented, adjusting his tie as he entered. You've outdone yourself. I wanted tonight to be memorable, I replied, meeting his eyes with a smile that didn't quite reach mine. He didn't notice the edge in my voice, too preoccupied with his phone. I caught the familiar flicker of concern when a text arrived, undoubtedly from Josephine, navigating the complexity of appearing at our home with her husband in tow. Is something wrong? I asked with practiced innocence. No, just Theodore confirming. They're bringing that vintage Bordeaux we talked about, he lied smoothly, deleting the message before pocketing his phone. The doorbell rang at precisely 6 p.m. Theodore and Patricia arrived first, their imposing presence filling our foyer. Theodore's booming laugh and Patricia's air kisses created the perfect distraction as Josephine and Daniel arrived moments later. I watched their entrance with newfound clarity, the careful distance Josephine maintained from Marcus, the overly casual greeting, the way Daniel placed a protective hand at the small of his wife's back while she subtly shifted away. Josephine, that necklace is exquisite, I commented, noting the platinum pendant that matched a purchase on Marcus's private credit card statement. Thank you, she responded, fingers instinctively touching the jewelry. It was a gift. How thoughtful, I replied. Someone has excellent taste. Marcus coughed slightly, moving toward the bar to offer drinks. I noted with satisfaction how his hands trembled slightly as he poured Theodore's scotch. Dinner progressed with the practiced rhythm of social performance. I presented each course with professional precision, steering conversation toward innocuous topics while observing the subtle current of tension beneath the pleasantries. When Josephine complimented my risotto, I thanked her warmly, mentioning I'd learned the technique during the cooking class Marcus had supposedly attended alone last month. You were there too? Daniel asked Marcus, confusion crossing his face. Josephine said she took that class with colleagues. Different class, Marcus interjected quickly. Mine was focused on Italian cuisine specifically. How funny, I remarked. The receipt mentioned French techniques. Perhaps I misread it. The momentary discomfort passed as Richard launched into a story about a client emergency. But I'd achieved my first objective planting seeds of doubt without direct accusation as dessert approached. I excused myself to prepare coffee, signaling to our housekeeper Beatrice with a discreet nod. We had rehearsed this moment carefully. While I returned with the coffee service, Beatrice would retrieve the manila folder from my office and place it beside Theodore's dessert plate. Before we move to dessert, I announced, returning to the dining room, I've prepared something special in honor of Waverly's recent success. On cue, the lights dimmed slightly as Beatrice wheeled in a projector cart, another calculated theatrical element. Marcus looked confused, This hadn't been part of our discussed plan. "Olivia, what is this about?" he asked, his voice tightening, with the first threads of genuine concern. "Just a small presentation," I replied calmly, "about loyalty, integrity, and the importance of transparency in both personal and professional relationships." As the first image appeared on our dining room wall, a screenshot of hotel charges on Marcus's corporate card, I watched 7 faces register varying degrees of shock, confusion, and dawning horror. The evening's true purpose was finally beginning to unfold, and not a single glass or plate was out of place for the spectacle about to ensue. The projection showed a simple spreadsheet: dates, locations, and amounts, but the implications hung in the air like smoke. Theodore Henderson's expression darkened as he recognized his company's financial records displayed on my dining room wall. "What am I looking at, Olivia?" he asked, professional caution evident in his tone. "An interesting pattern in Waverly's corporate expenses," I replied, my voice steady. "Specifically, charges approved by my husband for meetings that never occurred with clients who don't exist." Marcus half rose from his chair. "This is completely inappropriate. Please sit down, darling. I haven't finished my presentation." The steel in my voice surprised even me. More surprisingly, he complied, sinking back into his seat as color drained from his face. I clicked to the next slide. A text message exchange appeared, names clearly visible: Marcus and Josephine, planning their Pittsburgh weekend while discussing how to conceal their expenses through creative accounting. Daniel. Whitmore's fork clattered against fine china as he stared first at the screen, then at his wife. Josephine had gone perfectly still, her composure cracking for the first time as she realized the extent of what was happening. "These are private communications," Marcus hissed. "You had no right—" "Interesting perspective on privacy," I interrupted, "from someone who discussed dismantling our marriage in Waverly's conference rooms." I continued methodically through my evidence, each slide more damning than the last. Hotel receipts showed rooms booked on corporate accounts. Expense reports revealed dinners classified as client meetings. Calendar entries exposed the elaborate fiction Marcus had constructed to cover their assignations. "Theodore," Marcus attempted, turning to his mentor, "this is a personal matter that has nothing to do with—" "It has everything to do with Waverly," Theodore cut in, his voice glacial. "You've been falsifying financial records and misappropriating company funds. That makes it my business." He turned to Josephine, whose face had collapsed into silent tears. "And you, my own niece. Patricia's brother trusted me to give you an opportunity." Patricia Henderson, who had remained silent until now, addressed me directly. "You could have handled this privately, Olivia." "Like Marcus handled our marriage privately?" I responded. "Or how Josephine privately accepted jewelry purchased with our joint funds. No, I believe transparency serves everyone best at this point." Graham, from the board, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Theodore, given what we're seeing, there are regulatory implications we need to address immediately." Richard from legal was already making notes, his professional instincts overriding the social awkwardness. "Falsifying financial records crosses several boundaries beyond the personal, Marcus." Throughout this exchange, I watched Daniel Whitmore. Unlike the others focused on professional ramifications, his world was collapsing on a deeply personal level. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. 3 years, he said, looking directly at Josephine. "We've been married 3 years, and you've been ... He couldn't finish the sentence. "Danny, please," Josephine whispered. "Not here. We can talk about this at home." "There is no home anymore," he replied simply, removing his wedding ring and placing it beside his untouched dessert before standing. "Thank you for dinner, Olivia. I believe I need to call a lawyer now." His quiet dignity as he left provided the perfect counterpoint to the chaos erupting around my dining table. Theodore was demanding access to all the files. Eliza from HR was discussing termination protocols. Patricia was berating Josephine for destroying family connections. Marcus, realizing the comprehensive nature of his downfall, turned to me with naked hatred. "You calculated all of this," he accused. "You orchestrated this entire evening to destroy me." I met his gaze without flinching. "I learned from the best. You orchestrated the destruction of our marriage with the same attention to detail. The difference is, I made sure there was an audience for the final act." As the evening fractured into urgent phone calls and hasty departures, I remained seated at my immaculate table, sipping coffee that had gone cold. The crystal glasses caught the light from the abandoned presentation, refracting it into prismatic patterns across the tablecloth, beautiful fragments from the collision of worlds that could never be reassembled. 6 months after what became known in certain circles as the Henderson dinner incident, I stood on the balcony of my new condominium overlooking the river. The winter had melted into spring, ice breaking apart to reveal flowing currents beneath a metaphor too obvious to ignore. The divorce had been finalized with surprising efficiency. Marcus, facing both criminal charges for financial misconduct and civil litigation from Waverly Investments, had neither energy nor resources to contest my claims. Theodore, determined to minimize scandal, had facilitated a settlement that left me with more than fairness required compensation, perhaps, for the public service of exposing corruption within his firm before external auditors discovered it. My phone chimed with a message from Vanessa. Hearing just concluded. 10 months with possibility of parole after 6. Call when you can. I didn't feel the vindication I'd expected. Marcus's sentencing was merely the final administrative detail in a story that had already concluded for me. I'd attended none of the hearings, provided my evidence through depositions, and declined all interview requests from business publications fascinated by the scandal. Instead, I'd focused on reconstruction. My event planning business had pivoted toward corporate crisis management, a natural evolution, given my newfound expertise in controlled demolition of reputations. Companies facing scandal sought my guidance in navigating public revelations with minimal collateral damage. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. I wasn't expecting visitors, but security would have notified me of any unannounced arrivals. Through the peephole, I recognized Daniel Whitmore, looking more composed than when I'd last seen him leaving my dinner party. "Daniel," I said, opening the door, "this is unexpected." "I hope I'm not intruding," he replied, holding up a small gift bag. "I was in the building consulting on the renovation, and I wanted to properly thank you." I invited him in, curious about his purpose. His divorce from Josephine had proceeded even more quickly than mine, uncomplicated by the financial entanglements that had delayed my separation from Marcus. "Thank me?" I asked, offering him coffee, which he accepted with a nod. "For dismantling your marriage along with mine? That hardly seems gratitude-worthy." "For the truth," he clarified, his architect's eyes taking in the clean lines of my new space, painful as it was. I'd been seeing signs for months, but convincing myself I was imagining things. Your dinner forced me to confront reality. We settled into conversation with surprising ease, two survivors of the same explosion comparing notes on reconstruction. He'd thrown himself into his work, securing the major commission that brought him to my building. I shared my business evolution, and he offered thoughtful insights about rebuilding from structural failure, the architect's perspective on collapse and renewal. As afternoon stretched into evening, we ordered takeout and continued talking. Not about Marcus or Josephine, they occupied increasingly smaller space in our narratives, but about resilience, adaptation, and the unexpected opportunities that emerge from catastrophe. "I brought you something," he said eventually, retrieving the forgotten gift bag. It seemed appropriate. Inside was a small art piece, a kintsugi bowl, broken and repaired with gold seams, highlighting rather than hiding the fractures. Japanese, he explained. The philosophy that breakage is part of an object's history, not something to disguise. The repairs make it more beautiful, more valuable than before. I traced the golden lines with my fingertip, recognizing the metaphor's personal resonance. It's perfect, I said simply. He left after dinner with tentative plans to continue our conversation another day. Nothing presumptuous, nothing rushed, just the possibility of connection between two people who understood the value of careful foundation work before building anything new. After he departed, I placed the kintsugi bowl on my mantel and considered how differently events might have unfolded had I confronted Marcus privately that night in the kitchen. The quiet divorce, the dignified separation, the minimal disruption to ordered lives. But as I surveyed my new home filled with only objects I had chosen, arranged according to my singular vision, I recognized that contained implosions rarely create sufficient force for genuine transformation. Sometimes the most spectacular collapses clear ground for structures that couldn't otherwise exist. I lifted a glass to my reflection in the window, backlit by the city lights. To control demolitions, I toasted silently, and the art of strategic reconstruction. The woman who gazed back at me was neither victim nor villain, but architect of her own aftermath, designing with intention from the wreckage of what once was, building something stronger at the broken places.